Hello and welcome to the Gaggle, where we challenge and, if necessary, destroy media narratives. I'm George Szamuely. With me today, of course, is co-founder of the Gaggle, Peter Lavelle. So, Peter, President-elect Trump nominated the other day Lieutenant General Keith Kellogg to be his special envoy to Ukraine and Russia. And Keith Kellogg obviously has a record of commentary on Ukraine and Russia, and by and large, he's part of the swamp and utters the usual pieties that you would expect. He's also a Fox News contributor, along with four-star General Jack Keane.
He is as old as the swamp.
He's 80 years old.
He was one of the first tadpole in the swamp.
Yes, yes. So here is something. This is from about a year ago. He was on Fox News, and we can find where.
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
all of his appearances on Fox are the same. So
Yes, exactly. So here he is. Like
oh,
as I say, it's about about a year ago.
nice quaff.
Yes. um, and Fox. All right.
Retired Lieutenant General Keith Kellogg, who's a Fox News contributor, is currently leading an American delegation on the ground in Ukraine. He's back in the capital city of Kiev after seeing what things look like in the front line and elsewhere across the country, and joins us now from the capital city. So, General, these bold claims that Russia's defense minister is making about improving Russia's position in Zaporizhia, in the region southeast of the country, what's the real deal? What's the real story?
Yeah, John. John, thanks for having me. And I want to thank the Weatherman Foundation for giving me the opportunity to go through this entire country the last week and a half, headed into 2 weeks. And we've been everywhere from Odessa to Kharkiv in the northeast, out to Izum, down to the Donbass region. We've kind of seen it all, got a real good feel from the military, from the government. And look, right now there's a big fight going on in Bakhmut, and that's kind of an attrition fight. That's something the Ukrainians don't want to get involved with, and that's the reason why I've been so concerned all along, is making sure we provide them the amount of equipment they need. They don't need American troops. They've said that repeatedly. They don't need an allied troops. They can do it on their own, but they need the kit to do it. And I really believe when you look at a culmination point, you're looking at the spring, the summer, and into the fall, and that's going to be critical for the Ukrainians to win this fight. They can win this fight as long as we give them the kit to do it, the equipment, the tanks, which we're arguing about now, which is foolish, from the Bradleys to the MLRS to the self-propelled howitzers. They can take this fight to the Russians, and they can beat the Russians. And what's important about that, if they defeat the Russians, Putin falls, and it sets this whole region up for a generation to come. And makes sure there's stability. So they're fighting exceptionally well. The fighting is hard. They don't want to get into attrition fight, which means next year you don't want to go there.
You mentioned tanks a second ago, General, and now there's this dust-up going on between the rest of NATO and Germany over whether or not to send German Leopard tanks into Ukraine. Germany said that it's not going to do it. Here's what the Wall Street Journal said about that. Berlin's tank refusal is a self-inflicted wound. Many Americans think that the U.S. has to foot too much of the bill for NATO, and on this episode, they have a point. Unlike the Japanese, who are stepping up against a regional threat, Germany still refuses to lead after an invasion in its own neighborhood. Germany has since backtracked a little bit and said, well, if Poland sends German Leopard tanks, we would.
Germany is always on the wrong side, isn't it?
Ukraine gets these heavy tanks, and the Leopard's a fine fighting machine. How could that potentially change the equation on the ground?
Yeah, John. Well, what it changes because then you can fight combined arms warfare, which they haven't been able to do. And what I mean by combined arms warfare, and here's how they beat the Russians: they align the tanks with the Bradley fighting vehicles, which is an infantry troop carrier, with the self-propelled howitzers, the 155s, with MLRS, with the air above them, and they create very cohesive fighting organizations. The Russians can't beat that, and that's the reason when we developed these systems years ago, it was designed to beat the Russians when they were the Warsaw Pact in the area of Germany. And look, I have no idea why this kerfuffle is going on. It's absolutely foolish. It's also like with the M1 tank. Providing the M1. They said, well, it takes jet fuel. No, it doesn't. The AGT 1500 engine takes jet fuel. It takes diesel. It takes gasoline. As a matter of fact, it probably will take Chanel No. 5 perfume if you can afford it. But it's designed to put it together and fight together And I believe they could evict the Russians from all this terrain inside Ukraine, but we've got to give them the
So that's Kellogg.
Was he right on anything that he said?
No, no,
No,
no, no.
not one.
No, not no. And then recently he was on again Fox News, and kind of he was quibbling about Biden sending the ATACMS, but he more or less was saying, yeah, well, this isn't the right time. We should have done it long ago, and the usual kind of thing. Yeah, I mean, this isn't the wrong time. You should have done it. A lot. Back
Yeah,
in the
but I
day.
mean, given that interview, everything was just hunky dory. Just give them more stuff. Okay, I mean, even everything was done too late. Now look at the commentary at the time. Okay,
That's right. That's right. So now here is an article that Kellogg wrote for the National Interest, which is again a fairly routine neocon magazine. It wasn't supposed to be. It was called The National Interest. Precisely, it wasn't going to be a neocon, but it is turned into neocon. So this is also from about a year ago. And it says, what Donald Trump's Ukraine strategy could look like. So even at that time, Kellogg was obviously angling for a position with Trump. So this was very much singing the praises of Donald Trump. And then far from abandoning Ukraine, a second Trump administration would lift restrictions on Ukrainian military aid in order to force a peace settlement. And then he's saying, following.
What does that mean, George? Force a peace?
Well, that's it. I think we're gonna come to that, because then in April of this year, he co-authored an article with Fred Fleitz. I think Fred Fleitz. I think you've had him on Crosstalk, and there I think it was a little much more open to some kind of a deal, whereby the whole story of Ukraine driving out, which is what he was saying in that interview, Ukraine would just drive the Russians out. He kind of seems to have abandoned that notion. But again, as with other people that we talked about, with Marco Rubio and Pete Hegseth, they kind of see which way the wind is blowing, and suddenly, hey, America first. I'm with Trump. So here he says, following Putin's invasion, Biden pursued an overly cautious wartime strategy. Instead of clearly defining a goal of victory, Biden vowed to help Ukraine as long as it takes.
But their goal was always very obvious. We had Lloyd Austin say what the goal was. We had, when Biden was in Poland, he said what the goal was. Yep. What it was is a regime change in Russia, and then later the disintegration of Russia.
That's right.
We've known this all along. Again, this is just kind of charlatans writing.
I absolutely agree. I absolutely agree. It's the kind of thing people come on the networks. Oh, he hasn't spelled out the end goal. Well, we know what the end goal is, as you say. They made it quite clear. They don't have to spell it out. Their goal is to keep the war going in order to weaken, degrade Russia, and ultimately remove Putin, and ultimately to destroy Russia. To see it break up in 1,000 little pieces. They don't have to spell it out. They're not going to spell that out. So, he hasn't spelled it out.
And they considering he's a part of the original swamp, like I said, he was probably the first, the tadpole there.
Right.
This has always been their goal.
That's right.
Always been their goal. If first the Soviet Union, okay, then break up the Warsaw Pact, expand NATO, and then put a pincer on Russia. This is his DNA.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. Because really, what happened when the Cold War ended was that the West obviously regarded itself as having won, but the West was dissatisfied because they wanted unconditional surrender. And I think it was angry. They were angry that Russia hadn't surrendered unconditionally, that Russia still remained a power, a major military power, a nuclear power. That's why they had to expand NATO, to get the job done, finish that job off, and end Russia once and for all as any kind of a potential rival. So it's like, there's just some work that was left over because we didn't get the unconditional surrender.
The Russians cheated the hangman.
That's it. Because otherwise, why rush immediately the very next day to, it was literally the very next day to start expanding NATO? But this only raises the question, as long as it takes to do what? Biden should have provided Ukraine with the weapons it needed to win quickly. To win quickly.
Whatever that means.
Whatever that means. But instead, he was afraid of potential Russian, quote, escalation, unquote, and provided a cautious IV drip of arms.
Oh, really? Okay. I'd like a few drips of that $200 billion. I'd like a few drips, please.
It's such a stupid criticism. Oh, well, it was just they delivered everything. You know, they were obviously, he says, oh, well, escalation. Yeah, I mean, they were obviously very nervous initially of what Russia was going to do when they said, oh, Russia didn't do anything. So they just boom, 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 step by step, and they kept doing it. But I mean, to say, oh, well, it was just an IV drip of arms. Well, if it could have made such a big difference then, it should have made a difference. Biden opposed providing major weapon systems like tanks, aircraft, and long-range artillery before changing his mind. The result is that Ukraine has had enough weapons to fight, but not enough to win.
Well, see, you have to remember the assumptions. You know, I think this is even people that tend to agree with us overlook. The conflict was never supposed to happen in the first place because the Russians were going to back down. And if they deigned to liberate Donetsk and Lugansk, they'll be crushed by sanctions. The
Right.
ruble becomes rubble. See,
Right.
that's just about as far as they had thought.
Right.
And in the meantime, we had 8 years of NATOizing Ukraine. I mean, they thought they had their ducks lined up. Okay.
Right. No, that's right. And of course, the whole thing about, oh, well, we're sending enough to win. Now, what happens when they don't win? Well, you just have to send more. You know, it's just simply the formula for continued escalation. So creating this ridiculous nonsense. Oh, well, if only we'd sent a lot more right from the start, Ukraine could have won. I mean, it's nonsensical. And as a military man, he would have understood. Yeah, it's nonsensical. Just that that would guarantee you some kind of victory. No, it would have meant, hey, you got to send some more.
Well, this is disingenuous, or just he's a cretin. The only way you're going to be able to defeat Russia is to go up the nuclear escalation ladder. It's not going to be Ukraine. It will have to be NATO led by the United States. That's the only way.
That's the only way. Exactly. And that's why all the people, oh, well, we should have done more. They know that that's where it goes, because that, having done more, that's still not going to deliver Ukraine a victory. So you have to go to the next step, which is you have to take over from Ukraine. So then he goes on. In contrast, based on exclusively on his public statements, one can divine a very different Trump doctrine for Ukraine. He has argued that he would use his personal relationship with Zelensky and Putin to negotiate a settlement of the conflict in one day. The one-day time frame may be overly ambitious, as neither Putin nor Zelensky has expressed an interest in a negotiated settlement. Both sides appear to believe that they can prevail on the battlefield.
Well, George, I mean, can you go back just for a second? Can we dispense with this? He has argued that he would use his personal relationship with Zelensky and Putin. This is just absolute rubbish, everyone. It's nonsense, okay? Russia sees an existential threat from NATO led by the United States. He's not going to be charmed.
Right.
It's not like, let's bring some Trump steaks over and I'll give him one of my ties. It's not going to work that way. It will never work that way. And there is no reason to believe why Putin would even trust Trump as far as he could throw him.
Right.
So, I mean, again, this is just kind of romanticized, benevolent empire talk.
Right. Yeah, no, that's right. That's yeah. And then we have But Trump's proposed approach could change the calculation. Trump said, I would tell Putin, if you don't make a deal, we're going to give him a lot. We're going to give Ukraine more than they ever got if we have to. But then again, whenever he said those things, it did raise the question, well, what else are you going to give that they haven't been given? I mean, they've already got everything with the exception of nuclear weapons, because everything else they already have.
And they're even in the mainstream media, folks, the munitions stockpiles are drying up. Okay, they don't have missiles in mass right now that they can keep providing. So I mean, George is right. They gave them everything they possibly could, and it hasn't done anything. They're losing ground now. They've been losing ground for a half year.
Right, but I mean, they can keep the war going, and I think that's
well,
the key.
This is where George and I separate from a lot of other people. Yeah, I think that they can keep. I mean, they can keep losing, but they can
but they can keep the war
going. Keep going to lose. Okay,
that's right. But they can. But that's the thing. They can just keep that war going. I mean, the nonsense of driving out the Russians. I mean, that isn't going to happen. But they can keep fighting. Yes. And that's all that NATO is seeking. And then anyway, he goes on, Trump, the glorious Trump, and so on and so on. And then to bring Kiev to the table, Trump said, I would tell Zelensky no more. You got to make a deal. Ukraine can only sustain the war effort due to a large-scale Western support, and the prospect of losing aid would be a strong inducement to negotiation. Again, he's not going to do that. There's no upside for Trump to do that. He's not going to say to Zelensky, "Oh, that's it. No more." And then this is, but then he says a ceasefire along the current lines and subsequent negotiations would preserve a sovereign democratic Ukraine anchored in the West and capable of defending itself. Kiev would maintain its internationally recognized claims to sovereignty over all of Ukraine. A halt to hostilities would also facilitate the provision of reliable security guarantees, including possible NATO and EU membership to deter Russia from resuming the conflict.
Is there any discussion of security guarantees for Russia?
No, there isn't.
Oh, there isn't. These are not serious people, George.
Right. So that's right. So it says, while less satisfying than total military victory, this outcome would represent a strategic defeat for Russia and a strengthening of American national security and the Western alliance. So that is clearly where I think that where the Trump people are thinking. I mean, this is going to be something along those lines, will be the Trump peace plan, which is, basically a ceasefire along the current lines and negotiations, and then basically keep arming whatever that 80% of Ukraine, just simply use that as a storage ground for NATO weapons, and then there'll be all the bilateral security treaties with Kiev.
Well, what happens if Russia doesn't agree?
Well, that's the question. That's the issue.
Why would they agree?
I know. Well, no, there's no reason to agree, because I don't think it's because Russia will not have accomplished its goals. The question is, will Russia decide that it isn't worth continuing with this war? It's already 3 years. Is it worth continuing?
Why not?
Okay. Well, that's something obviously we're going to have to see whether Russia will say, well, we don't. I mean, if that's the deal, then it's not a good deal for Russia. I mean, that's clear.
Well, I mean,
whether then Russia says, no, we're not going to accept it, and then risk essentially the escalation. And that, I think, is where I think it's heading, which is a NATO escalation under Trump.
Look, I've kind of reverted back to my original position in looking at this conflict, because these are not serious people. These are not serious suggestions. These are not serious proposals. They're going to go nowhere. And so I'm going to revert back to my original position that this will be decided on the battlefield, not a negotiation table.
That's why I don't think it will be decided on the negotiation table. I don't think there'll be any negotiations. I think it'll be something like a ceasefire, a de facto ceasefire. There was no negotiations to end the Korean War. I mean, it just came. They brought it to an end. This became the ceasefire line, and that was that. So it's not like they sat there working out the terms of the future, other than maybe they'll work out the terms of some kind of disengagement, but there won't be any sort of a big peace conference.
No, I don't even agree with that assessment, because then that means a ceasefire means to prepare for the resumption of hostilities in what, 2, 3, 5 years?
Yeah.
Okay, well, that's going to be unacceptable.
Well, we'll see. Whether I mean, it's I don't know which way that's going to go.
Well, why stop? Russia's not losing. It's not winning the way we would both like, but it's not losing.
It's not losing, but then the question is, will it be worth continuing? Because that's there's suffering considerable casualties.
Yeah.
But, that's great. Is it worth continuing, particularly as it's quite likely that Trump and NATO will escalate?
Where's the sweetener for Russia? What's the inducement for Russia in all of this?
No, there isn't. There isn't. Other than it's a way, I think, of basically a halt in the process, and essentially not risk, which is something that Russia has really been very wary of, not risk a military confrontation with NATO, which is still quite possible.
Well, it is at war with NATO. Okay, so
right. But there hasn't been a direct shooting.
I mean, George, if there's going to be peace, can only be meaningful when security is guaranteed to all. That's not in the cards.
Right. I don't disagree with that. But the question is it worth continuing this war, or is it simply like, look, it's been going for 3 years. Let's just call a halt. Well, do we want to go on for another 2 years? Because the longer it goes on, the more dangerous it gets. I mean, it's now quite dangerous.
Yeah, yeah, and that's why there has to be an outcome where we don't come right back to it. Okay, where you and I are going to be podcasting about this 3 years, 5 years from now. Okay,
right.
No, that's what there has to be a resolution to the security issues. When that is done, then we can think about turning the page. But we're not even nearly there. And this whole Trump, look, you and I both had a good chuckle about it during the campaign. Oh, solve it in 1 day. So Trumpian, so Trumpian. Okay, we both knew that wasn't realistic. He's president-elect right now, and it's just as unrealistic. So these people have no new ideas because they don't think in terms of security. And
here's the statement that was issued today.
Anyway, George, how do we say this? I mean, we say President-elect President Trump, President-elect
Trump,
elect President. It's hilarious.
This is an issue that was a statement today issued by the Russian Foreign Intelligence Service, the SVR. Now, I don't always rely on what the SVR says because they've been, issuing statements how the West is about to push Zelensky under the bus. They're about to abandon Ukraine, and so that's never come out. But here they issued this statement today. The West is preparing for a possible freeze of the Ukrainian conflict, and then it goes on. The press office of the Foreign Intelligence Service of the Russian Federation reports that, according to information received by the SVR, in the conditions of the obvious lack of prospects for inflicting a strategic defeat on Russia on the battlefield, NATO is increasingly inclined to the need to freeze the Ukrainian conflict. The West considers the implementation of such a scenario as an opportunity to restore the combat capability of the Ukrainian armed forces and thoroughly prepare Kiev for an attempt at revenge. NATO is already deploying training centers in Ukraine through which it planned to drag at least 1 million mobilized Ukrainians. Because I think that's where this is heading. I mean, you know, what we talked about before. Trump will present this plan, something along the lines of Kellogg is talking about, and then he's not going to put any pressure on Ukraine. That either he's going to escalate against Russia, or if there is a deal, if you know somehow it becomes accepted, boom, they're going to turn Ukraine into just you know a NATO arms storage depot, and I think that's certainly the Western plan.
That's just a fantasy, like just a fantasy. Why would Russia allow that?
No, there's absolutely no reason for it.
They would not allow that. Okay.
Right.
I mean,
well, let's hope so. I mean, all I can say is that
George, all these things are always talking at the Russians. Nobody's talking with the Russians. Okay. Right. Right. This is they're in their little fantasy world, you know. Right. Well, if we have a ceasefire, blah, 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 you know, it has to. Everybody has to be in the conversation. Maybe not around the same table, right. Okay. But then, what did Russia get out of this? Nothing.
No, absolutely no. That if that was going to be the deal, then I think it'll be a defeat for Russia. I mean, there's no question about that. That would be a defeat for Russia. Russia will not have achieved any of its wartime objectives. Anyway, he goes on. Another important area of the alliance's work during the truce will be the restoration of the Ukrainian military-industrial complex.
Right.
Active work is underway with Western military-industrial companies, including the German Rheinmetall, from which they are required not only to invest, but also to send leading specialists and high-performance equipment to Ukraine. NATO headquarters understands that without providing the Ukrainian armed forces with sufficient weapons and ammunition, the expectation that the Ukrainians will be able to conduct high-intensity combat operation over a long period of time is unrealistic. I think that's what the thinking is. I don't doubt that this is what the thinking is. I mean, it's you know it's terrible, but that's I think what the plans are. These are the plans that are now being drawn up. The thing again, I am often skeptical about the SVR, but the SVR said, yeah, these are the plans that are being drawn up. Yeah, that's what they're planning on.
Yeah, well, okay, well, good luck with your plans.
Good luck with you. Okay. And then to solve these problems, the West will need to actually occupy Ukraine. Naturally, this will be done under the guise of deploying a peacekeeping contingent in the country, quote, peacekeeping, unquote. The territories that are supposed to be distributed between the occupiers have been determined. The Black Sea coast, Romania. Western regions of Ukraine, Poland. The center and east of the country, Germany.
Right.
Northern regions, including the capital region, Great Britain.
Oh, they always get the cushy job. We'll take the cafes, okay?
In total, it is planned to introduce 100,000 so-called peacekeepers into Ukraine.
Fantasy.
Yeah. Fantasy. All right. And then, according to incoming information, the German military has already turned to the experience of the Nazi invaders establishing an occupation regime in Ukraine during the Great Patriotic War. At the same time, the Bundeswehr has come to the conclusion that it will be impossible to carry out police functions without Sonderkommandos of Ukrainian nationalists. So this is the auxiliary forces, the Ukrainians. That will come up with a new name, but in essence, they will be the same Bandera punishers. Does Russia need such a peaceful settlement option? Question. The answer is obvious.
Well, I mean, to their credit, I mean, and I think this is obvious to all our viewers. I mean, this obviously is the lens that they understand Ukraine, and they're going to use historical references like that.
Right.
100,000? Come on. Who's going to do that? How many Germans are going to sign up for it? The Poles might say, yeah, we'll kind of move into Western Ukraine.
Right, but I think that's why they're saying that essentially they're going to use these Sonderkommandos, Ukrainian Sonderkommandos, because they don't have the manpower. They don't have the 100,000. The Poles will provide some manpower. I don't know who else who's going to provide any large amount of
Well, I
manpower.
don't know, but you want to rely upon the Romanians. No, no disrespect, but I mean, come on.
No, I agree, but the idea behind this is still peacekeepers. I mean, they're not going to be used in combat. Then if there was a prospect of they're getting shot, it wouldn't happen. But the idea, this is peacekeepers, but essentially, it'll be a kind of foreign occupation with a view, essentially, of total military occupation and subordination of Ukraine. Ukraine just simply becomes a fort, a NATO fort directed at Russia.
Yeah, but well, why would the Russians accept that?
No, I don't think they will accept that. I mean, but that's something like that is being planned. I mean, I think that's where this Trump Kellogg plan will lead to. Because if something like that, this idea of this partition will accept the ceasefire along the lines of contact, this is where it's going to end up. Because they'll say, okay, we give up on those eastern territories. We're not going to try and take those eastern territories for the time being. We can't do anything about it. All right, we'll have a ceasefire, boom, and then we'll use the interim period to turn this into an armed fortress.
You know, I just have to wonder, George, if Ukraine even has the infrastructure to support such an occupation now. Okay. I mean, the critical sectors of the economy are on their back or destroyed. I mean, the electricity grid over this last week take massive hits. Okay. So, I mean, I don't know. I mean, when you have a plurality, this is a Gallup poll that came out of Ukraine. Okay, not a Russian pollster, but an American one. The majority now want some kind of settlement. Okay, of Ukrainians.
Right.
Okay, I suppose, moving conscription down to 18, very, very unpopular, but maybe Lindsey Graham will get his way.
It is unpopular, but
this occupation, one second, this occupation is going to be expensive. It's going to be
it's going to be expensive, but Ukraine's not going to afford. Ukraine is basically that it doesn't have any money. It's not going to pay for it. It will be paid by NATO land, the United States and Europe, and they have lots and lots of money. I mean, they've been pouring huge amounts of money into Ukraine, and they get ready to go on pouring this amount of money.
Well, George, what happens if they're okay? First of all, the Russians don't agree to it, which they certainly won't. What happens when some French, Italians, and Romanians are killed? What then?
Well, that's not going to be very nice, and that's why it has to be. But there has to be a ceasefire. There won't be they will only be introduced after a ceasefire. Look, I mean, the point about the SVR saying this is what they're thinking is that I think this is what they're thinking. I think that's what the plan is, and I think that's the culmination of this Trump peace plan, that this is where it will head. Now, I agree with you. I think that it makes no sense for Russia to accept this because it's obviously a very bad deal. But I think that's where they're thinking, where they're heading.
Well, there's one thing that is being floated around. I'm glad George is presenting. I hadn't seen this, but there's lots of stuff floating around right now where I think added to this would be sanction relief. That was part of the.
Right, that's so. But that's the one that I find completely unbelievable.
Well, I mean, everybody, the Europeans. The European Union's model is that they renew sanctions every 6 months. The United States, once the U.S. sanctions you, the sanctions never end.
Right.
They never end.
That's right.
Because who's going to be the first in Congress? Hey, let's let Russia.
No,
that's politically untenable. You can't.
Yeah. So that's that, and then as a culmination, Putin spoke very warmly yesterday about Trump. And then here we have, he was in Astana at the Collective Security Treaty Organizations. And I'm not sure that's where he's, yes, let me just find the right place. Yeah. Okay. So this is. So yeah, he was asked about the incoming Trump administration. So he says, well, so the question is, how much should and could the current level of escalation, which began with the Biden administration's authorizations to hit Russia with ATACMS, affect the ability to establish contacts with the future Trump administration? How important will this factor be in building relations? Or are there other signals that make this difficult? And then Putin says, we do not know what Mr. Trump and the current president discussed at their meeting, and therefore we will not comment on this. There are different options. If the current President Biden believes that by escalating the situation, by increasing the degree of confrontation, he is creating conditions for the future administration, it is easy to get out of this situation because the newly elected president will say, it's not me, it's people who have completely lost their minds. I have nothing to do with this. Let's talk. Of course, this is an option. But of course, we haven't heard this. And what we did here is and what we talked about the other day is when on one of those Sunday talk shows, Mike Waltz, the incoming national security advisor, suggested that he was actively in consultation with Jake Sullivan, so he knew all about this, and he seemed to approve of the plans. You know, there's no he didn't express any dissatisfaction with the plans. And then Putin goes on. It's possible that the current administration wants to create additional difficulties for a future one. This is also possible. But as far as I can imagine, the newly elected president is an intelligent and already quite experienced person. He, it seems to me, will find a solution, especially after he has gone through such a, let's say, a very serious test as the fight to return to the White House. So, you know, he will find a solution. Then he says, you know, I think you were also most struck by not by the fact that absolutely uncivilized means of struggle were used against Trump, absolutely uncivilized, up to and including attempted murder, and more than once, by the way, in my opinion, he is not safe now. In my opinion, he's not safe now. There have been all sorts of different cases in the history of the United States. I think that he's an intelligent person, and I hope cautious. He understands all this, but I was more struck by the fact that during the attacks on him, during the fight against him, not only was he subjected to humiliating, unfounded procedures, legal charges, and so on, but attacks were carried out on members of his family, on his children. And then it says, our gangsters don't do that. When criminal gangs fight among themselves, they don't touch women and children. They leave them alone. Men fight among themselves. But those guys did touch them, you know, but it's so disgusting that he once again underlines the entire decline of today's American political system. The thing about the women and children, I kind of wondered, what was he thinking about? Like the Mar-a-Lago raid, you know, when they raided his home in Mar-a-Lago, they went through Melania's personal belongings, and then of course they went through the teenage son's bedroom. I guess that's what he's referring to, because I'm not quite sure what other, you know, women and children they went after.
Yeah, that has to be it.
Right. So that's quite a warm.
Well, that's an interesting juxtaposition to Dr. Sebastian Gorka, isn't it? Interesting.
Right.
You know, it was look. I mean, this is a not so veiled attempt to say, pick up the phone.
Yep. Yeah, I agree.
Never hurt anybody. Let's have a chat. Probably disagree.
On a you know, lighter tone, just before I forget, he was also asked about Angela Merkel and the business of the Labrador.
I saw that.
But what was funny about that is that he made the obviously intelligent point. He's saying, look, this happened 20 years ago. I didn't know that she had a phobia about dogs. But what surprises me, he said, is why has she been going on about this for 20 years? I told her then, I didn't know, I apologized, and that should have been the end of it. But for 20 years, she's somehow been going on and on and on, suggesting that I did this deliberately. Of course, in itself, it doesn't make any sense. Why would he do this? Why would he want to antagonize Angela Merkel? This was 20 years ago, by bringing on a lab who, no, I mean, any person with common sense would know that a lab doesn't intimidate. I mean, he didn't bring out a German Shepherd or a Doberman, but he said that she's expended all this energy, claiming that I did this deliberately. And then he says, hey, come over now, come and visit me now. And I promise I'm not going to, I won't have a dog to greet you. But I don't think, and he said, I don't think she's going to take up my offer.
This afternoon, one of my neighbors has a young Siberian Husky, and they are absolutely gorgeous, but they can be a bit intimidating. Okay. And because he's had contact with my dogs, he came running up to me. He put his paws right here like this and started licking my nose. Okay. Right. Now, that dog can be very fierce if it wants to be. Okay. But it was no different than a Labrador. I mean, anyway, yeah, 20 years. Geez, I hope you're not, after 20 years of friendship, I hope you're not going to be, going on and on and on about something I said 20 years ago.
That's right. That's what he's all this time. And she keeps arguing for this absurdity that he did it deliberately. And again, why would he do this? Why, given that we know Russia was cultivating Germany all those years and years ago, this is long before anything, Russia was cultivating Germany, why would Putin want to upset Merkel? I mean, it just makes no sense.
George is absolutely right. You can't overestimate how important the German relationship was for Vladimir Putin. I mean, that was the jewel, that was supposed to be the game changer. That was going to be his legacy, all dashed. Okay. And it wasn't because of a dog.
Right. But I was just reminded of that when you said, well, pick up the phone. And I think that's what he said here at Astana, apropos of Trump. So it's kind of friendly and warm, considerably warmer than the initial response when he won. Well, they made no response, but this is a kind of much warmer. And yeah, I mean, I think that's the thrust of it. Hey, pick up a phone and we can talk. So, we'll have to see. I think, to going back to what we started, which is Kellogg, I think that, he's going to do what Trump wants him to do. I think ultimately, we've looked at all these statements. He hasn't said anything of the slightest interest. Basically his mouth, all the cliches of the swamp. But sensing which way the wind was blowing, he also made noises that he thought would appeal to a kind of America First, populist nationalist base, because I think he was probably angling for some kind of a position with Trump. So everything really hangs on which way Trump will go. And I think, we've both expressed some skepticism about what Trump is really thinking.
Yeah, but if his point, man, and you can be given a mandate, a writ, and it doesn't mean you're going to be able to exercise any power. You might be just do a position paper for me, and you never know. You never know. It could highfalutin title, but it could be meaningless. Okay, at the end of the day. Right. But as George pointed out, I mean, he wanted a no-fly zone at one point in time. I mean, he's an 80-year-old man, no age discrimination coming from me, but his entire worldview is American hegemony. His entire career, one of the most important objectives of a military person over the last 80 years is the destruction of Russia. That, I don't think, did he just, have a change of heart? Did he find Jesus? I mean,
no, I don't.
It doesn't happen. It just doesn't happen.
No, I don't think it does.
In the interview that George presented us on a Fox News interview, I mean, it reminds you of that mindset. I mean, the only negotiation is where you're going to sign your surrender. That's how these people think.
Yeah. No, that's right. I think during his first term, Trump appointed Kurt Volker as the point man on Ukraine, and of course he was a total disaster for Trump, and personally a disaster because he kind of played a role in the impeachment and not a helpful role at all. So you can see Trump has a track record of picking really not at all good people for this position. I think it's going to be up to Trump. Trump is going to have to give him a clear instruction, and I think he's a general. He's used to taking orders. So whatever Trump gives, Trump will have to give him an indication of what I want to do. I think he's going to go and carry this out.
Okay, we haven't heard anybody even whisper the name Douglas McGregor.
No, that's true.
Well, why couldn't he give him that writ?
I agree.
I think that would have been pleasing to the base, MAGA world, everything. And again, a position like this is purely advisory. I mean, McGregor, send me more tanks. No, he's not. That's not that kind of position. Okay,
No.
it is basically the president's whisper, and and I think he would just say, "Look, you got all these guys. You got Dr. Sebastian Gorka. You got all these. I'm just going to give you the other point of view." That's what I see my position is doing, is saying there are options here,
right,
Mr. President. And that's what Trump should have done.
Right, I agree. No, I agree. I think if he had appointed McGregor, even if he had appointed Rick Grenell, we say, okay, well, Rick Grenell is slightly out of the kind of mainstream thinking. He's much more attuned to a kind of MAGA or America first. Yeah, maybe that he's going to take a more sensible position. Kellogg doesn't really do it, and so yeah, you can find things that he has said, recently, just like you can find it with Pete Hegseth and Marco Rubio and Mike Waltz, where they seem to say some sensible things. Yeah, well, maybe we should just bring this thing to an end. There's no end game here, whatever. But I think that's not what he thinks. He's a a kind of a Jack Keane type. I mean, that's it. He's there to be. Jack Keane, he's a 3-star general. Keane is a 4-star general.
They're interchangeable.
Right.
Right. I don't want to be misunderstood here. I want to see this conflict come to an end. And if Trump can be a catalyst for that, he can be at the center, fine with me. Absolutely fine with me. Okay. But given the people he's surrounding himself with right now, he needs a McGregor.
Right. That's the problem. He needs
a kitchen, little kitchen cabinet,
right,
to say, what are we doing wrong here? What's our first step? Just a court gesture.
Right.
Gesture. That's what we need.
Right.
Okay.
No, I think that's exactly right. He hasn't done that. And there isn't, he's hired Sebastian Gorka and he hasn't hired McGregor. And I think that's the key. Why? I mean, what's the need for somebody like Gorka? Because you've got enough hawks, neocons, obsessive Russophobes, and interventionists. You already have those, so it's not like that area is not covered. You already have people who think similarly to Gorka. But so, what was the need for having Gorka there?
Well, it's even worse than that, George, because Gorka is a media whore. Okay, yes. And that's what he wants to do. That's what he sees. I'm the Sunday show guy. I'm going to do all of basically he's going to be the press officer for Trump's foreign policy. At least it appears to me to be his aim, because that's the only thing he's even remotely qualified to run his mouth. Okay. That doesn't do this.
No, that doesn't.
President any favors at all.
You're absolutely right. I think what attracted Gorka, or what attracted Trump to Gorka, is he's very good when he goes on television. He's very good at being rude to people. He'll tell people to shut up. He'll call people idiots. He's good at that. And Trump responds to that. He likes people who he thinks are good on television. And I think that's going to be Gorka's calling card. He's going to come on and he's going to on the Sunday talk shows and he'll tell them that they're all a bunch of idiots. And I think, and then Trump will then tweet out or, truth out, they say, what fantastic performance by Sebastian.
Yeah,
So,
well, okay, performance, one thing. Does it advance his
no,
image?
no,
No.
I don't think so. But I think as we've talked before, I don't see any particular upsides for Trump to bring this to an end. I don't really see it. I don't what would be the pressure to bring it to an end. Let me see. People say that, oh well, when Nixon came in on Vietnam, but America was suffering casualties in Vietnam. America was losing lives. The cities were in absolute turmoil. This war was really dividing the country. So there was pressure on America to bring it to an end. Here, what's the pressure? No Americans are getting killed.
Well,
So what's the big deal?
you're absolutely right. Because it was a nice campaign gambit. Okay, let's end war. That sounds good. And who's except the arms contractors and corrupt politicians. They really enjoy the war. Because it just enriches themselves. But I mean, nominally speaking, that's a good message. Okay, but on January 20th, considering the downside of trying to get out and the upside of, well, let's just keep it going.
Right, right.
That's what they want him to do.
I agree. And there are a lot of downsides. And I think Putin, when he said, I don't think he's safe. That's one of the downsides. If you're serious, if you're really going to try and bring it to an end, there's definitely a downside. There are forces that will definitely try to get you out of the way.
Remember, everyone, it's a bipartisan issue, Ukraine.
Right.
Okay?
Yeah.
There's enough of these Skeletor or GOP members in the Senate that will definitely want to keep this going. Does Trump really want to put it to I want an overwhelming election, all right, let's see what the Senate has to say.
Right. No, exactly.
Uh-oh.
Exactly. And when you look at the Senate, I mean, other than Rand Paul, maybe a couple of others, I don't see any great number of voices that would say, yeah, we got to cut our losses and bring this thing to an end. And even in the House, you're talking about a minority that's in the House that really.
How many at the height of peak Zelensky? How many Republicans in the House wore a Ukrainian flag? Yeah. Okay. The Democrats, they don't want, that's Biden's war. We're for Biden, or whatever his legacy. But you're going to be able to alienate or attract, depending on the position you take, Republicans. Most Republicans are going to keep with this war. Everyone.
I think so. I absolutely agree with you. Yeah.
Like I keep saying, it was a campaign ploy. And that's called politics. That's politicking. That's maneuvering. We separate that from policy. Now we're going into the realm of policy. It's a totally different ballgame right now. And so George is right. What is the upside?
None at all.
That's the dilemma of hegemony and empire. Okay. Right. You get addicted to it, and you can't wean yourself off of it. At least not easy.
And that's why the whole school of thought that somehow, Trump's going to do this, he's going to bring this thing to an end. It's just make believe. I mean, it's fantasy. It's people, just wishful thinking and attributing to Trump all kinds of ideas that they may hold, but that's not what Trump holds. And so it's like, it's going to be over very quickly. No, it's not going to happen like that.
George, do you think? I'm sure there are people in Trump's orbit, people that have already been given the nod for a position in the administration. Do you think Trump has seriously thought about it? I doubt it. No. I doubt it. Okay. No. Okay. No. And it's these people. I mean, if this Russian intelligence is correct, I too take it with a grain of salt. Okay. But so some interesting little nuggets in there.
No, I think I agree. I mean, you have to take it with a pinch of salt. I think they've made a lot of predictions in the past that have not borne out. But nonetheless, I think it's plausible to think this is the way they're thinking. And they're saying, basically, hey, we're going to just move in, occupy it. The Americans aren't going to do it. The Americans will say, yeah, this is your task. And I think this will appeal to Trump, who, say, well, we got to deal with Asia, we got to deal with China, it's up to you to do this. And the Europeans, they say, yeah, okay, we'll do it. But, obviously, this will be after some kind of a de facto ceasefire is in place. Again, purely speculative, but I'm sure that something within NATO headquarters, some plans along those lines are being hatched even as we speak.
Well, this is what we can agree on. How much longer are the last leggers going to keep saying last legs?
Right.
Okay. The George and I have we have a corner in the market on this one. Sorry, everybody. Okay, but we do. All right.
I agree.
Because what is the downside for Trump to cut and run? There's huge downside.
Huge downside. Huge downside.
Keep kicking the can.
Yeah. No,
It's the Europeans are still they're working.
Kick the can, dump it on someone else. Yeah, but for him, there are no upsides taking these huge political risks, which is what it would be, a huge political risk for him to end it. Then he'll be responsible for the Ukraine. Absolutely, he's going to be blamed. You sold out Ukraine, and he's going to say you engineer the great Russian victory. You did this for Putin, your good friend Putin. You sabotage NATO. He's going to be he personally is going to be blamed for this.
By his own party.
By his own party. Absolutely.
You heard it here, guys. I keep with Jordan, we keep saying this, okay? We in the hope that this is going to come to a rapid end because of a new administration is illusory. Right. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, exactly.
And even if Trump wanted to do it, will they allow him to do it?
That's right.
And it's interesting what Putin had to say. He's not safe now.
No, I don't think so. I think, yeah. He probably needs to invest in a kind of a private security service. I mean, if he's going to take any risks, and I don't think he is, but even if he doesn't take risks, generally invest in a private security service. I wouldn't put all my faith
I just had
the Secret Service.
I had a very evil, vicious thought that came into my mind, but I'm going to keep it to myself. Okay, I was just thinking, if Trump is in danger, who would I like to have him have as his bodyguards? Not saying anything. Okay. All right, everybody. This is kind of firming up a little bit here. It's confirming our intense pessimism that this thing is going to come to an end anytime soon.
Yeah, I think so.
All right. This is The Gaggle with Peter and George. We're on Local, so please go to thegaggle.locals.com. This is Friday. We've got another video coming up after this one. We will reconvene on Sunday to do our mega wrap. And then we have a live stream on Monday.
Monday, 10 a.m. Eastern time. Please join us then. And Buddy's here to say, look,
Big Buddy. You know what? Buddy represents Big Chihuahua. Okay, we have Big Pharma, we have big hospital.
That's right, big Chihuahua, and he says what we can't talk about is big tip jar. We talk about little tip jar. That's it. It's just the empty tip jar. So Buddy is very, very unhappy. So if you have a few bob in your pocket, whip them out, dunk them into that tip jar. See if Buddy can be placated for a little while. These cold winters it's putting him into even worse mood than usual. So we're very grateful for all your help, friendship, and support. The more you're able to donate, the more of these videos we can make, the more we can improve on the technology, and above all, we'll have dogs that will be at least in a more positive frame of mind. So remember, if you like The Gaggle, please like, share, and subscribe. See you soon. Bye-bye.